diversity of thought as most important. Because if I hired a load of ex-military people, we'd all think the same. It wouldn't be a very effective business-led security organisation, I would suggest. If you are looking to build a team or run a team, you just make sure you've got that diversity of thought in there. So you've got a richness throughout the team, and people are coming at problems from a different perspective. Because that's what I like to hire: problem solvers. People with different aspects and different views on particular problems.
Welcome to the Technology Boardroom podcast. We're always keen to hear from people who are at the top of their field. And this particular series is going to focus on CISOs, their history and their journey to date. Now, there's a lot of information about this role that you can get from books and from training courses. But as many people often find out, information security doesn't follow a script always, and hard-earned experiences are a great way to learn and adapt, and hopefully we'll try and elicit some of those in conversations like this. So I'd like to welcome Darren Desmond, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at the AA. Welcome, Darren.
Thanks a lot, Prav. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm going to start off with a really big question. How do you pronounce CISO,
CISO normally, just CISO, yeah. I must admit, it's even more recently. I've been to events where I've spoken to non-security staff and C-suite members, and they haven't got a CISO and they call it a CISO, or there's loads of variations of it, but I've always pronounced it CISO, so that's what I'm running with.
Okay, good. I'll stick to that as well. I think I do anyway. All right. Well, without further ado, what we'd like to start off with is just your background and life experiences in terms of, your professional life experiences. Your personal life is quite interesting as well, but your professional experience is what we'd like to focus on. So first one is, how did you first get into cybersecurity and what led you to the CISO role?
So it's quite a long story. It's not particularly exciting, but I spent the first part of my career in the military. I joined the military police when I was 23. Shortly after that, I joined a specialist team which performed surveillance on all sorts of different criminal groups, civilian and military. And we started using more and more technology at that point. So we had a fax in a suitcase. It was quite an interesting piece of kit, and we used to be able to fax images directly to a computer, which they were then saved onto a floppy disk from the surveillance observation post. So that's when I first started getting involved in tech. We also used to put in quite a lot of remote cameras that were powered over microwave or transmitted over microwave rather. So I really started getting an interest in tech then. That's when I bought my first computer, actually my first PC. And shortly after that, I transferred to the Army Special Investigation Branch. Now they're responsible for all sorts of level 3 criminal investigations. So that includes everything from murder to everything fraud, serious fraud, and everything in between. And as you can imagine, as we got certainly into the 2000s, you started to see more and more technology creeping into people's personal lives. And every time we'd arrest somebody, typically they'd have a mobile phone or some sort of PDA device back then. And the first cybercrime investigation I actually performed was on an MOD-owned laptop. And I won't say where it was because it's not very fair on the organisational people involved, but it was a civil servant who was using this MOD laptop, and they'd been using it to access some dodgy material online. So that was the first ever cybercrime investigation I performed. That was in 2000. So that sort of piqued my interest a little bit, really. And then as I moved through my career, I transferred to military intelligence for a few years, and we did a lot of document exploitation in Iraq in 2006. And what that really means is not just document exploitation, but when, for instance, when special forces kick a door in somewhere, they'd seize everything in the building, just gather everything and shoot and scoop, basically. And that included mobile phones as well as hard copy documents and everything else. And they'd bring them back to the exploitation. So then we'd work on dealing with those devices and see what further information we could elicit from them to then go and do the next strike. So it's quite an interesting time. And the last 3 years of my career was really focused, again, on criminal investigations. Last 3 years of my career in the military, that really focused on criminal investigations. And I think about 60% of my caseload at one point involved some sort of computer forensics investigations. Again, whether that be fraud or some sort of sexual exploitation activity. So that's what sort of led me down the technology path. When I left the military, I worked for the Atomic Weapons Establishment as their principal cybercrime investigator for a while. And then after that, where did I go then? I was then an incident responder for Betfair. for about a year, and that was a really busy role. And I was out of my depth. I don't mind admitting it. I was well out of my depth. I've bitten off more than I could chew. I've stretched the truth a little bit on my CV, to get the role, and it was a good role. We had a great team working for us. I suppose the value I brought to that particular role was I know what the questions are I need answering. I just don't know how to get to those answers. So the team around me were able to get to those answers, but they didn't know the questions to ask. So we were, working sort of, we were aligned in the way we were. And from there, I just sort of moved into more general cybersecurity roles. I was an information security manager for a company that's now owned by, I don't know who they're owned, but they got bought out, I think, a few years after I left. And then I moved on to Virgin Media. I was doing cybercrime investigations again there and threat intelligence work. That's where I first sort of dipped my toes into the threat intelligence world. We were doing private prosecutions on set-top box pirates. So, digital content fraud and theft, really. Working quite closely with the security teams, network teams, and again, developing my interest in technology and just, progressed through there, really. And eventually I was a consultant for a while in a threat intel startup. I say a consultant. I was the only qualified professional security person there. So everybody else was like a techie or in sales, and that was quite challenging because it was a completely alien environment for me. But it was interesting and fast paced. So the people I worked for were fantastic. They were quite interesting characters. Yeah, I've got some stories I can't probably tell you on here about that. But and then from there, I moved to the opposite end of the spectrum, from an 18-person startup to EY, which is obviously a massive global organisation with 200,000 people in it. And that was an interesting time. That was just as we started to see the emergence of the uptake in Office 365, and lots of companies were pushing Office 365 out there without configuring it, just expecting it to be secure, as sold. And obviously it wasn't. So attackers were, slashing the life out of that with business email compromises left, right, and centre. And, I had no problem hitting my chargeability numbers for those 2.5 years I was there, because we just smashed those investigations in, week out. It's an interesting company to work for, but I must admit, working for those big consultancies is very different, and it wasn't really what I wanted to do longer term. It was nice to work for a big company like that again, but not what I wanted to do long term. So I ended up going to the AA. I just adopted my second daughter, so both of our children are adopted, and I wanted to spend a bit more time closer to home. Obviously, in a big consultancy like EY, you're all over the world, not just UK based. You're all over Europe, certainly, and a couple of occasions, they asked me to go to Russia on spec without any real brief to try and land a contract, and it was all a bit last minute for family life, really. So I ended up at the AA as the head of information security in the first year I was there, working as direct reporting to the chief information officer, and slowly sort of built the team, grew the team out of the chief information officer's organisation and into the chief risk officer's organisation, and created a security operations function as well. And that's kind of where we are now.
Brilliant. So interesting to hear that you didn't start your journey with an academic approach to information security. That didn't stop your journey into where you are today.
No, I mean, what really set light to my career, as it were, was doing, and people won't like this, right, because they never do, but it's doing the CISP. So when I was leaving the military, you get a resettlement grant. It's not a huge amount of money, but the time off is quite generous. And I did a risk management course. I did an ISMS 27001 implementers course, and then also the CISP. And that changed the game for me. Every time I applied for a job, that was one of the key requirements. And there weren't that many around at the time. There were a few, but it wasn't what it is today. And, a lot of people that I've worked with, they've gone and done, an MSc at Royal Holloway in Information Security, for example, which is generally considered to be the premier qualification from an academic perspective. And employers very rarely ask for that type of qualification for this role. They want to see the well-known certs that typically are very American-led, but they're the ones that are preferred. So that's what stood me in good stead, really.
Right, okay. So you touched on your armed forces career there a little bit. What learnings did you take from that you brought into your current role as it stands today?
I think it's a bit of a boring answer, right? Because most ex-forces people say this, but it's about the work ethic and the ownership of an issue. So if I'm given an issue to deal with, I expect to own it from start to finish, unless somebody takes that away from me and there's a clear handover between us. So when I am given a task, I like to see it through to conclusion, and I like to maintain ownership of things, to make sure I do them to my standard, which obviously can get quite difficult the further up the management chain you go, because you can't always own everything. So you have to put your trust in people, which, I know we've got a question a bit later on about teams and delegation and stuff. But I think the biggest thing is self-discipline. You learn resilience in the military, obviously, because it tends to be in a quite harsh environment. I've done 4 operational tours, 2 in Bosnia, 2 in Iraq. It's rarely easy. The days are rarely short. And, you have to adapt. So I think probably flexibility, discipline, and resilience are the 3 key things I took away from my time in the military.
Great. Okay. What's been the most challenging part of being a CISO, and how have you navigated that?
I think it continues to be, for me, articulating quite complex issues in very simple terms, not only to the C-suite, which is typically where you end up as a CISO, briefing them as to why you've come asking for more money or more resource, whatever it may be, or why a particular controller's failed as well, quite often. But it's explaining the importance of the smaller things to the broader audience. So to end users, for example, talking about phishing, we do okay on the phishing education front with the minimal resources we have at the AA. And we've looked at some of the more advanced solutions out there to help us get better at it. But we've done quite well with what we have. We drop phishing simulations, or we drop phishing simulations every month, for example, and it's we measure the performance of those over time. And it's been really good. But that's only one aspect of security awareness, for example. Trying to articulate that to an audience that, they've got their own day jobs to do. Trying to articulate the need for specialist training for people who work in finance, because they're going to be targets, right? People who work in HR, because they're going to be targets. People who are developers or admins, because they're going to be targets. Trying to educate them, they still need, they need additional training over and above the minimum mandatory training they must have every year, is always a bit of a challenge, because they don't see the value in it immediately, and they don't see the value in, a fish. They don't understand what fish can lead to. So it's telling the whole story, I guess, the whole story and how it impacts that victim, or how it might impact that victim. I think that's the most challenging aspect, because you have to do that from everybody, to the CEO, the chairman, in our case, all the way through the C-suite, down to, hierarchical nature, but to the cleaners, for example, and they probably don't even touch a computer from one week to the next. So I think that's probably the most challenging part, making everything you tell them and talk to them about relevant and non-technical, because it's very easy for security folk to dive in to the technical stuff. I don't particularly consider myself that technical, but I do get carried away with it sometimes because I like it, because I'm a geek. And I get carried away with trying to explain something over and above what needs to be explained.
Yeah, it's quite challenging, isn't it? You've got a broad set of experiences there, from hands-on roles all through to management and through to C-level positions that you hold right now. Do you ever miss being that techie, that geek, and having that that immediate ability to get results?
No, because it's been replaced with something else, which we'll probably come into in a bit more detail a bit later. I don't miss it, because I like having. I employ people that are smarter than me. Right? They're better than me at what they do. There's no doubt about it. But I obviously select people for a very good reason. And so being able to say to them, look, this is what I need. It's up to you how you go and get it. It's quite powerful, but it's also quite rewarding in watching them grow in that role and understanding why you need that particular information and why you're asking that question. So I don't particularly miss it, no, and I certainly don't miss the sort of 3 a.m. call-outs when you've got to go and recover a device from somebody, which used to happen back in the day, less so now with the advent of modern environments and the ability to be remote all the time. So yeah, so I don't really miss that at all, no. I quite enjoy the management element of it. I like managing the people.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. So we're going to move on to more around strategic insights and technical learnings. So you work for an organization that provides services in one of the most hostile environments in the world, aka Britain's roads, and you probably have a bit of first-hand experience yourself through your motorcycle touring that you do as well. But what part does information security play in getting drivers and their vehicles back on the road?
Yeah, so it's fundamental, really, because again, you've got these days you've got a vehicle. We're just doing a big rollout actually of some new tech for the vans. We've got EVs in the fleet now, which are connected. We've got a very diverse landscape when it comes to vehicles now. Our vehicles are connected 24/7. So when they're out there recovering people by the roadside, they're receiving all of their taskings and all of the feedback they need from the contact centres, third line expertise, all receiving it through a handheld device. And securing those handheld devices is fundamental. So if they can't access that device, it slows down the roadside recovery significantly. And when you talk about people who might be in a physically dangerous situation or a vulnerable person, perhaps by the roadside, and they can't necessarily get the help they need from anywhere else, you're putting people's lives in danger by not securing that. So very important that the endpoints are secured to an appropriate standard. But similarly, all the back-end systems as well, everything we do in the AA to secure our technology really feeds those frontline patrols. And if we can't secure those, then we'd be failing at our job, and we wouldn't be able to support the patrols doing the best job out there. So it's fundamental to what we do, and the ability to recover quickly when we do have an incident, whether it's a non-security related issue or a security related issue. It's obviously part of our role as well.
So obviously, there's the business has a purpose, has a need to deliver its products and services, and that often you need to balance the need for security and the business's need for agility and innovation. How do you find that balance?
Well, it's everything is a balance, right? And this way, everything's I've read it. I watched a podcast the other day, and so they're saying everything in life is a negotiation. And the more I thought about it, the more I realised it was true. Nobody ever gets their own way, or all their own way anyway. So, this might be different in other organisations, right? So I'm sure it is. And it depends on the level of regulation you're exposed to. But for us, everything is security risk management, because we couldn't possibly, lock ourselves down like Barclays Bank, for example, use those guys as an example. We don't have the resources to be able to do that. In some cases, we don't have the need to do that. Our crown jewels are our customers' data, for sure. And we need to protect that more than anything. But we're compliant with the payment card industry data security standards for our online journeys, and then we manage different bits of the organisation to different levels of security. So we understand what our crown jewels are, and we protect those as a priority. I guess is probably the best way to frame that. That being said, there is occasion. Again, this has happened in other organisations I've worked with, particularly where I've been investigating post breach. There's sometimes a lack of understanding by system owners. And again, like I say, I'm not just talking about the A now. I think this is probably in general, that they own not only the management of the system whilst it's in life, but the holistic life cycle of the asset, wherever it might be. And I was on a podcast again a couple of months ago, and we were talking about asset management being the most important aspect of security. And I was trying to work out whether that's right or not, because asset management includes ownership of the asset and accountability for managing that asset. And I did think at the end of it, I thought, well, that's actually a valid point. And the guy that was, sort of talking about it, he said, well, there's a reason it's almost first in all of the compliance frameworks you look at, and it is in nearly every single compliance framework that I've looked at, or security framework. Asset management is front and center. So it's helping the risk owners understand what risk it is they're owning, what they're accountable for, and what they've got to do to manage that risk, whether it's put a project in place, fund a project to fix whatever problem's been identified, track it through to conclusion, seek acceptance, or whatever approach they want to take. So the balance for us is getting security risk management right, and make sure the appropriate escalations are in place, because I think a few years ago we didn't necessarily have that. There've been a significant underinvestment in the AA, and a lot of these processes have been lost for whatever reason. And we're coming out the back of that now. We're actually in a much better spot. We're not perfect by any stretch, but we're in a much better spot than we were 6 years ago.
Because you mentioned that negotiation is a key part of the skills needed. I mean, that obviously means that you occasionally need to make trade-offs. Can you describe a time where you recently had to do that, obviously without revealing any sensitive information, and what you learned from it?
Well, so we are. I'll start with a sort of opposite end of the answer, and then I'll work my way back if you don't mind. So we're building an app at the moment in Power Apps, and it's based around a platform, Compliance Forge Publish, which is it's a spreadsheet tool, right? And it's an aggregation meta compliance framework, if you like. It's called the SCF Secure Controls Framework. And we're building a tool which automatically populates risk assessments based on the user's input. So it's you could do it in a spreadsheet, right? You could keep doing it now, but we're building an app for it. But effectively, it lists out the primary controls and gives them a weighting. If that primary control is not available, then it presents a number of mitigating or compensating controls that an asset owner could apply to at least secure that asset to a certain level. And then we put in a protection level agreement with that asset owner to understand to help them understand what level of protection they're providing their asset, what more they might be able to do in the future, for instance, maybe when their ability to apply some new technology services. So that's the approach we've taken for a couple of years now. So when, for instance, for example, they can't perhaps apply MFA, okay, and we do have some legacy systems where that can't be applied, and we can't SSO it. We were able to present to them um, compensating controls, but very, very clearly defined compensating controls that do have a weighting on them. So it's not just about applying one of those controls. They need to select several to match the initial primary control. So when it comes to trade-offs, that's what we're working towards. And so we're doing it a bit ad hoc at the moment for a spreadsheet-based tool, but the app we're building is going to make that a lot easier, not only for my team and for security folk in the organisation, but for the end users. They could run their own security assessment on an asset based upon a number of Q&A that they'll see populated on the screen. So it's going to be a huge step forward for us, but it's always a trade-off, and especially with the older systems. Some of our systems, we went through a phase a few years ago where we were very focused on getting rid of our legacy operating systems. We had lots of them. We're down to almost zero now. Not quite zero, but almost zero. And that piece of work has been going for some time. We have to make lots of compromises there in terms of prioritization, because we can disrupt the business if we just try to do it too quickly. So there's always a compromise, and that was probably the most recent example, I guess. We're now moving on to sort of legacy apps that have not really been loved the way they should have been.
Got you. Understood. How do you measure the effectiveness? So you obviously got a security program running, but how do you measure the effectiveness of that program? And what metrics do you use to report to the board? What do they understand?
So we a few years ago, my chief risk officer has just changed at the moment. So I moved my team over to the risk function probably 3 years ago now. And the lady that I've worked for the last 3 years, she's been brilliant to work for, first and foremost. And she put in a risk appetite model for the organisation. So, for each operational element of the organisation, each exec had an operational element of the organisation. They had a risk appetite statement to align to. Once those risk appetite statements are set, you work towards that. You work towards to getting within tolerance effect. And that's kind of the model we've been using over the last few years. So everything we do in the security world is geared towards achieving a certain level of maturity under the NIST CSF. So I won't go to the numbers we're looking at the moment, but we're looking. We understand where we started, which is a fairly low bar, and I think the people that were doing it were quite generous at the time, if I'm being honest. You may remember that. Looking back on the last couple of years, we've used NIST CSF as the standard to look at our maturity model and consistently measure it. Last year we had another external assessment as part of some other activity we were doing, and that validated our findings. Although again, I think when you're an internal team, you know where the bodies are buried, so you tend to be a bit more harsh on yourself. But the external assessment was very good, and gave us some pointers on where to direct our strategy for the next couple of years, which we're working on now. So having a consistent set of metrics is very important. I don't think it matters which framework you use. Some companies use what used to be called the CIS Top 20. I don't think it's called that anymore. But I think if you have a set and stick to it, and you're able to articulate it simply to the C-suite, that's the most important aspect. And you need to be able to track back your metrics to a source of truth to give them confidence in what you're telling them.
Got you. And do you ever get asked for anything like return on investment? Is that something that comes across in your conversations with people in the organization? And how would you respond to that?
No, I never get asked about it. I introduced Rosie a few years ago, return on security investment, as a term into the AA, and everybody looked at me and blinked, and didn't really understand what I was getting at. And it's never really landed when I've been trying to talk to them, because I think they just see it as a sunk cost. But the last couple of years, maybe since we've been owned by the new investors, we've started talking about asset protection, value protection and revenue protection, rather than return on security investment, because they get that much more. I mean, the rest of the business is creating value. Everything we do is creating value in the organisation for the investors. And the last couple of years we've been doing really well. Considering where we were before, the business wasn't doing great. It was obviously a publicly listed business, so that was there for all to see. And it wasn't doing great at all. I think now we're in a very different situation. We're doing really well as an organisation. Maintaining that trajectory is obviously very important for the investors, and security plays a key part in that. So I was doing presentation in the theatre in our Phantom House building a couple of weeks ago as part of one of our planning exercises we do with the roadside business. And I was talking about value protection there, and there's a couple of the C-suite there, and they were nodding away and really getting it. They understood that they're there to create value, I'm there to protect it, and that they understand that distinction. But I think in terms of, I don't think there's been there's a few models out there. If you look at FAIR, there's a couple of other models that people have created. And I saw one the other day, actually, which is quite good, which somebody in one of the WhatsApp groups shared with me. And I really liked it, and we might try and adopt that. But I think trying to articulate the value of security in pounds remains a challenge, I think, for almost everybody in the industry.
Understood. So, measurement is all well and good when you kind of have a static baseline. But as we all know, the threats landscape doesn't stand still for anybody. It's constantly evolving. How do you prepare your organization for that constant change, and how do you respond to it?
Well, so for me, it's been a real evolution, because this is my first CISO role, really. I've been, like I say, I was the head of when I started, and my previous role was a sort of assistant director, which is kind of an equivalent level person. I didn't really have to do any of that stuff in those organizations. Well, the threat intelligence piece I did, that was part and parcel of the role, but that was all the role was. I think you have to have good partners, and we've moved from having, again, you may remember this one, we've moved from having a lot of vendors who weren't really servicing the AA's needs very well at all. We've moved from that to having true partnerships in place now. Over the last sort of 4 years in particular, we've had some really good partners come on board and work with us. I've got to say, Microsoft have been fantastic. They get poo-pooed a lot in the tech world. People don't like them for whatever reason. I think it's unjustified a lot of the time, and some of the time it's justified. But I think there's a bias when it comes to Microsoft. People try and avoid it when they can. But I've yet to see a more complete solution from a security standpoint for an organisation of our size. And as a partner, they've been pretty good. They invest a lot in our organisation, they're good. So I think having partners that are able to support you and provide you with the additional bits around the edges is really important. Lots of the vendors we use, they work quite closely with us now, whereas before we never used to get that. It just used to be they turn up for subscription costs at the start of the year, support contract. If you exercised it was never really what it said on the tin, and it wasn't. We weren't maximising the money that we were paying for these things. So I think now, when we've got good partners, we're able to leverage threat intelligence from them. We've got some partners we don't actually have, a current business line with, who still provide us with intelligence for free because they want to work with us at some point in the future. And it's those sort of organisations that provide that extra value, that extra visibility as to what's going on out there. And 9 times out of 10, I don't want to poo-poo the NCSC at all, because they're obviously doing a great job at a very strategic level. But their sites like the CISP and a couple of other government-led resources aren't that useful from a tactical perspective to organisations like ours. We know who the threats are from, or the proxies are working for. That doesn't really help us at the tactical level. So working with good threat intelligence-led partners is key to maintaining that visibility.
So obviously you're in quite a strategic role, and you have to communicate with a broad range of people in your organization. How do you manage relationships with the stakeholders, especially non-technical executives and the board, for example?
It's for non-technical stakeholders, it can be quite challenging because because if they're not working in tech, they don't think we're that relevant. I'm just getting pinged on Teams. Just 2 seconds. You might have to edit this bit out. I just need to set ourselves do not disturb. So for non-technical stakeholders, I think they don't always feel that information security functions are relevant to them, because you're not an IT security customer internally. So I think working with them sometimes can be challenging. I think you have to build relationships on a very personal level there, which I hope I've done at the AA. I have fairly regular meetings with those stakeholders. And they're generally receptive. There is a little bit of nervousness, whenever the security guy rings you up, they tend to be a bit wary of it. And I don't know why that exists, because I'm a fairly friendly guy. My team are brilliant. They're very engaging, and we don't bark at people or anything like that. So I do find it a bit odd when people are intimidated by us coming to a meeting or asking to come to a team meeting to present on something or talk about something. And it's getting less and less, I think. But obviously, I've been here 6 years, and most people know me. I'm quite that. So I make my presence felt when I'm in the building. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting one for the non-tech stakeholders, but they're starting to get it now. When we talk about different areas of the business that require security inputs, such as HR or finance, even, or uh, whatever it may be. Procurement's an obvious one with a third-party risk element. And there's sometimes when we have new people come into the organisation, I think that sometimes they're a little bit surprised that we have such so much skin in the game, as it were. But we've had to muscle our way in and make sure we stay there over a period of time. For the technical stakeholders, it can be a bit hit and miss. And again, I've experienced this in other organisations I've worked for when some technical system owners just want to keep security well away from their systems. And the reason they generally want to do that is because they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. Not necessarily maliciously, but they're doing it because they just don't know any better. They think security is going to come along and say no. And that's not the case, generally speaking. There's occasional times that I've had to pop the red flag up and say, you need to stop what you're doing right now, but it's not happened that often. So it's building relationships on a personal level still carries a lot of weight, I think, especially in an organisation our size, really about 7,500 people. So it's not a huge organisation.
Right. Okay. So we're going to move on to emerging trends and how they impact your current role and the organisation. The first one, bit cliched now, but artificial intelligence. How has it impacted your security posture, if at all?
Well, I guess the first thing we did was block all access to AI based SaaS apps, as soon as we could, because the risk at the outset of this, when it first exploded about 18 months ago now, isn't it? When it first, ChatGPT in particular, first exploded. I know AI has been around since about 1957, but when ChatGPT first came on scene, obviously everybody was very excited. That's what we heard everywhere. So people were curious. They started going out. They realised they could use it to rewrite the documents or to write the documents. And we had to block it as quickly as possible because the risk, obviously, to our organisation is data loss through people copying and pasting stuff in, not realising what they're doing. There's off on somebody else's server, not on an AA server. So that's the first thing we did, really. And we're lucky we were able to do that quite quickly with some of the tech we've got in place now. It's quite configurable. So that's the first thing we did. And I've been following the AI thing quite closely from a security standpoint, but also from a general user standpoint. So I'm not an expert on it by any stretch, but my initial feeling, I think Mitra just put some stuff out on it a little while ago. I think it's called the Atlas framework, which is very much focused around AI, Mitra attack type framework stuff. But a lot of the terminology they're using for the attack methods are very similar to what was already in the Mitra attack framework. So my feeling is at the moment, if you've got the basic cybersecurity hygiene nailed, and that includes, or specifically includes, should I say, a secure software development lifecycle, then AI shouldn't present too much of a problem to an organisation. I think where we see the biggest impact is where phishing emails are a lot more realistic. We use AI in a couple of our tools to actually shape phishing simulations, and also we've been proof of value testing some of the third party email solutions are out there that are very much AI led. So the marketing tells me. I think I think we're going to see a big impact, but not yet. I think if you're an early adopter, it's like anything. If you're an early adopter, and you can get it right, it's going to be fantastic. If you get it wrong, it could ruin your business. So we've been quite cautious. We've put a governance framework in place, which is just starting to gain some traction now. We did that quite early. We've put a policy. We drafted a policy. It's not been published yet. We've been working with legal and the DPO to make sure the appropriate controls are in place. But the reality is, if we had again, I'm not saying we're perfect, but if we had all of our basic cyber hygiene controls in place, a la NIST, we'd be in a good starting point to deal with AI risks.
Got you. So from an information security perspective, artificial intelligence has a number of different touch points. It could be that the business is looking to adopt AI and enhance the way that they deliver their services. It could be that you see it from a perspective of being targeted in attacks that are backed by some kind of artificial intelligence type activity, or it could be you yourselves using that AI technology in actually optimizing and delivering security operations. What's your experiences of that?
Again, I think it's certainly when it comes down to the front line of security, technical security, when we talk about email by and large, is making sure you've got enough layers in front of your email platform, whatever that may be. They're able to tackle these kind of threats. And again, I think we use a particular technology. We've been looking at layering that up in terms of applying some defense. The threat intelligence aspects of AI, the use cases for AI are quite interesting. That's probably where we'll focus, because we don't have a brilliant threat intelligence capability at the moment. We do have some. It's okay, but it's not where I want it to be. And I'm one of these people that always wants more. So so I think I genuinely think we're on the precipice of it. I don't think we've jumped over it yet, but I think we're on the precipice of a massive change in security because of AI. I just don't think we've seen its true potential yet. Again, I'll talk about Microsoft very briefly. I'm not going to poo-poo because I think they're fantastic. But we've been looking at security for Copilot, or Copilot for security rather, and we can't really see where the value is at the moment over and above what we already have. Or some of the third-party things we're looking at. So, I do think it's got massive potential. That's a silly thing to say, because I think it's obvious it's got massive potential. I don't think we're going to see, Skynet taking over the world yet and Terminators running around sending phishing emails. But I don't think we're that far away from it. I think it'd be a very different world we live in 10 years. I think what we need to do as an organisation, as an industry, not the security industry, I mean the technology industry, is look at the real use cases where we can free people up to do more interesting jobs. You've got some people in organisations still moving spreadsheets around and copy and pasting stuff between systems because they're running legacy systems. And I think, where you have organisations, and insurers are classic for this. They have systems that have been running 20, 25 years. They don't want to touch them because they don't want to break them, because they don't know how to fix them, because all the people are built to have left. Where you can move data between systems in a structured and organised way. I think that's where we'll see the biggest gains. But again, it could be a complete white elephant, right? Because we were talking about blockchain a few years ago, like it was going to change the world, and people seem to have forgotten about blockchain. So apart from the crypto guys, they're still cracking away at it. But I think we're on the precipice.
Great. So one of the other things that, just from an emerging trends perspective, one of the things that constantly is like shifting sands is the compliance landscape as well. Obviously, there's a whole raft of new compliance legislation and regulations that are coming out, like NIS2, DORA, the EU AI Act, the EU Data Act. Did any of these have any of these changed the way that you operate security?
Not significantly, no, because we as I say, we operate in this CSF framework, and we have a number of European-based clients. For example, if you look at Volkswagen Group, Porsche, we're partnered with lots of the auto manufacturers and the European ones as well. So we were kind of already prepared for that. We have a standard called TISAX, which we're assessed to every 3 years, which is largely based on ISO 27001. So it's a compliance framework. It's another compliance framework. And we're also ISO 27001 compliant. So we're kind of doing all that stuff anyway, working towards improving it and getting it to a place where I'm happy with it. So it's not drastically changed what we're doing. I think those legislation changes in some cases, and compliance changes in others, they're very useful if you're starting from a point of low maturity. And as I say, for a few years ago, that's exactly where we were. But we're on a journey now, and it's incorporated all of those compliance frameworks. So we've been sensible in our approach, really. We've not created work for ourselves, but that way.
So nothing majorly new in those new regulations, providing you had a good footing in the well-known frameworks that already existed for many years.
I'm sure there'll be some surprises. Like I say, we're not perfect, and security is nothing if not surprising. So I'm sure there will be something that pops up at some point, but I don't foresee it being a big problem for us to.
Understood. So we'll move on to just culture and people when it comes to security. So how do you build a security first culture in your organization? Is that even a thing? Do we even need to consider that?
I think it is a thing, and the reason I say this is because one of my colleagues is a great guy, ex-Navy guy. Apart from that, he's a great guy. He was telling me the organisation he used to work for at the start of every meeting, and it was a sort of pseudo government organisation. At the start of every meeting, they'd do a 5-minute update on security. Every meeting in the organisation. So there'd be a slide with some some threat intel on it, some updates, what the business is doing around security, and just for 5 minutes at the start of every single meeting, they do that. And it was a similar sort of thing when I worked at the Atomic Weapons Establishment from a health and safety perspective. It was a safety first environment, and this other organisation was a security first environment, very important for them. And they got hit a few years ago massively by the not petty, WannaCry attacks. So you can probably work out who these organisations are. So I do think there is a security first culture out there in some organisations, but I think most of the organisations that end up with that culture have been severely impacted by a cyber event of some sort prior to achieving that culture, to the point where they've lost parts of the business through an attack. And sadly, sometimes I think that's the only way to wake some organisations up to the threat. And that sounds like quite a harsh and possibly even naive thing to say, and there might be people watching this saying, well, you're not doing your job properly if you can't articulate the threat. And yeah, that may be the case, but my experience has been, people take a lot more notice about priorities when they've had a system or set of systems have been down for 10 days and the business is hemorrhaging money and members and customers, whatever you want to call them. So a security first culture typically is triggered by an event, a big event. And to put that in takes time, resource, and persistence. I think if you don't have the event in particular, it takes a lot longer. Because people generally find it quite dry as a topic. I don't know why, because I think it's fascinating, but people think media and PR is fascinating, and I don't know why they think that either. But each their own, I guess. But so it's difficult to get that on the front of people's minds, and generally it's only when it's impacted them. I think for us, most people have some sort of IT system, whether it's an iPad, a phone, or whatever it might be. And we've still got people my age have got desktops, and I've got one behind me. It's my own personal desktop. We're still bashing away on that occasionally. And obviously, what happens at work can also impact you in your home life. We in previous organisations, I've seen incidents where somebody's been saving details on their personal device relating to their work access, and their personal device has been compromised because it's an old device and it's never been patched. They've got some crappy antivirus on it from 1987, and that gets compromised, and their spreadsheet called passwords gets stolen by the attacker, and all of a sudden the attacker's got access to their work systems, including probably their salary management system. So I think when you can tell those stories and put some real context to them, that helps people think a bit more broadly than just I've got to do the phishing test at work, or I've got to do my mandatory training. It gets them thinking about how it might impact. I think when we have third-party incidents where partners are impacted, it helps colleagues understand that this is quite real and it's quite close. It's not just about Russia and China and North Korea. It's about criminals trying to take our stuff. And they start to wake up to it then, and then they start getting a bit more engaged. We're doing Cyber Awareness Month in October, again, second year we've done it. Last year, we didn't do a great job, but it was okay. This year, I want to do a much better joined up messaging piece, around all the things we've talked about actually, around, what security means for an organisation, what compliance means, why we do compliance, why we do security, what AI means for us. And, we had an okay engagement last year, but it wasn't where I wanted it to be. You've got to invest heavily in security education awareness, whether that investment is actual cash or whether it's people's time, or a bit of both, preferably both, or even a managed service you bring in. Did a campaign a few years ago, different organisation, and we had loads of bottles of Coke and all sorts made up with special labels dedicated to the organisation with people's names on, all sorts of different, very bespoke stuff. But it was very engaging for the audience. And it's the end. You've got to give them some incentive, right, to participate in this, because it's not really part of their day job as they see it. It's like, I'm not going to go and, I was going to say I don't do finance, but I do finance in my role. But, I'm not going to do that out of choice if I don't have to. So you have to incentivize them. And I think that's the only way to build a culture of security first.
And in order to do that, depending on the size of your organization, you obviously need a team to do that. What do you look for when you're hiring for your team, and how do you go about retaining that talent? Because there is a massive shortage of security skills as it stands today. How do you go about those challenges?
Yeah, so my approach has changed a little bit over the last few years, and it's largely due to my head of SecOps He's a really smart cookie. I'm not going to name him because somebody will headhunt him, and I don't want to lose him. So he's a really smart cookie. He's a great guy to work with. But he said to me a few years ago, "Why do you just keep hiring senior consultants? Because you've got no depth in your team." And it got me thinking about it, because the year prior to him joining, I'd had 3 consultants leave more or less in 9 months, and it left me in a right pickle because I'd committed to a load of work and only had 3 consultants. So I brought on some apprentices, and they've been absolutely fantastic. So the people I brought on board were mid-career sort of change people. So they'd had a career doing something else. One guy's ex-army, the other guy's an ex-IT service desk guy. Both very smart guys, and they came and did a national apprenticeship with us. And now they're fully qualified as security analysts in my team. And they've added so much depth to the team. It's been a game changer for me. And I'll continue to hire people in that way going forward for as long as I can. But when I'm interviewing people, and again, this may be slightly controversial, is that, I have to like them to start with, because I don't want to work with people I don't like. I like working with people I like. You have to spend quite a lot of time at work, and you don't want to spend it with somebody you don't like, right? So I need to like them, and they need to be likable. They've got to have a sense of humour when I'm hiring them, because it's when you're in your darkest moments and you are working at 3 a.m. trying to, get some poor old techie to do the right thing. You need to be able to keep your morale up and have a sense of humour. And I like interesting people because, again, InfoSec can be quite a dry topic. It can attract dry people. I like interesting people. So when I'm interviewing them, I like to understand a little bit about what makes them tick, what goes on in their personal life, and all that sort of stuff. It's not mandatory, but I like to know what's going on there. And like I say, they've got to be personal. And I always say they've got to have a bit of fizz, a bit of something about them. And the reason I take that approach is because they have to be able to engage with everybody at all levels of the business, from the CEO. And if they can't do that, then they're not much use to me, really. If they're brilliant at tech, fantastic, go work in a tech team. If they're brilliant at GRC and pulling spreadsheets together that change colour when you're ultra value, fantastic, go work for finance. If they can do all that as well as be personal, brilliant, they're on. And that's what I look for when I'm building a team. All the rest of it can be learned, because where we are today, not where we are a few years ago. Where we are today is we've applied frameworks, we've got models now, we've got checklists, we've got processes. We didn't have that 6 years ago. And I don't know what the previous teams had done, but they hadn't done that. So so that's how I build a team. And I'd like to think we're a high-performing team as well, because they get great feedback. Their mid-years and end-years are always fantastic. They're very rarely a management challenge. So I love them.
Obviously, security, can't sleep really, because threats don't operate on UK business hours 9 to 5. They're a constant pressure. How do you specifically avoid burnout in such a high stakes, high pressure role?
It's a tough one for me to answer, because I've never worked in a role that wasn't high pressure, apart from before I joined the army, when I had a fish and chip shop, and that was just hard work. When my dad died when I was 16, so I took over the family business and ran that till I was 23, and it was kind of lots and lots of hours every week, and obviously unsocial hours as well. So that was different. But when I joined the military, it's obviously a very different kind of pressure. It's still hard work, but it's a different kind of pressure. And obviously lives can be at stake without sounding too dramatic. But what I've learned over the last few years in particular, because we mentioned this earlier on, I used to like to try and take ownership of everything myself, because I like to see everything through. When I was in the special investigation branch, if you got a case file, you did everything from the initial information coming in to the production of the documents and a presentation at court martial, right? And everything. And there's lots of stuff to do after that, admin wise as well. So each case could last years, basically. And some of them did. So end-to-end ownership is really important to me. Letting go of that was quite difficult, but I delegate like mad now. As soon as anything comes in, people know me in the business, so they tend to raise stuff directly with me, no matter who they are. Well, again, whether it's the CEO or somebody else, I don't care. They come to me, but it gets delegated straight away. I try not to do the things myself unless I specifically have to, if it's an employee investigation or something like that. And I set very clear expectations around ownership, and I remind the guys and girls about that. The team, should I say, about that on a regular basis, about owning issues end to end and seeing it through. Because I think it's really important for our internal customers to understand who their go-to is. So if they do have a point of contact in InfoSec, that shouldn't change every other week just because somebody's off or whatever they're doing. They need to hold on to that, or somebody else needs to babysit it until that point of contact comes back. And it's really important for me to know that our internal stakeholders are getting that continuity, because it ensures that consistent advice is given people, know when they've documented something, where to keep it, where to store it. Again, knowledge management's been a bit of a challenge for us in the past. We're getting better at it now. So I delegate like mad, and I try to avoid taking on too much personally. And it sounds really lazy as a manager, but I think if you don't do that, you would end up burning out quite quickly. And I think as a manager, that's my role as well, right? To make sure my team get as much exposure, especially the more junior members of staff, as much exposure to as many different domains of security as possible. And that's, again, going back to what I said earlier, that's really rewarding for me. And I've found it more and more rewarding the more I've done it. So I don't feel the pressure that much, if I'm being honest. Time off is sacred to me. I make sure I don't work weekends unless it's an absolute crisis that I need to be working on. Or I've let things slip beyond a deadline that I shouldn't have done. So that's how I manage it, really.
It's quite aspirational in that, just touching on what we said earlier, in that, you've gone from fish and chip shop owner to chief information security officer at a pretty big, well-known branded organization in the UK. I think it's a great advertisement for anybody looking to come into this industry. You don't have to have had the the degree or academic experience to get into this industry and do well. So
I left school when I was 15, and I had 4 O-levels, one of which was ungraded. So yeah, exactly. I mean, it depends on your route, of course. But the military was fantastic to me, so that's what's really helped me out.
So next area is I'd like to touch on is innovation and problem solving. Now, you've got some experience of moving from a very legacy environment into a more modern environment. What challenges did that present for you, and how did you overcome them?
When I joined, we were just at let's say just at the start. I think it'd been going for about a year of a transformation program. And, everybody was all very excited about working in Azure and moving everything to AWS and blah, 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 which is all great because it's the right thing to do. I've no doubt of that now. But the reality was that they thought they could lift and shift everything. So all you're doing really is lifting your problems from one environment to another. And that's generally what happened. And, we've had to sort of retrofit that over the years with some security. And we've matured over time. Again, we didn't do anything perfectly first time. We're still not perfect now, as I keep saying. And I think all of this is a journey. I think we all understand that security is ever evolving, and you are literally on a never-ending journey. We'll never fix all the challenges we have in my organisation in my lifetime, let alone working life. So I think moving from legacy to modern was a good thing to do. I think sometimes, again, I'm not being specific to the AA here, but I think sometimes organisations need to think about the cost of building new in a new or modern environment versus a lift and shift approach, because it probably works out cheaper in the long run. Building a serverless environment in a modern integrated environment is probably more efficient in the long run than doing a lift and shift and then trying to sort those problems out in situ. It just doesn't make sense to me to do it that way, but that's what a lot of organizations seem to do. So that's one of the biggest challenges. It just moves the problem, it doesn't solve it. And then, of course, once you've done the lift and shift, what a lot of organizations do is they then go focus on something else. The system's still working, customers are still getting served, we're getting paid. So, they don't necessarily want to prioritize the move to a modern architecture, which includes, all the security goodness that brings. And some of the stuff gets forgotten a little bit until you have an incident or there's an audit that pulls it up, or, all of those other tactics that we must employ as security people to get what we want doing done. The skill sets are quite different as well. So if you're a legacy organisation and all of a sudden you want to move all your stuff to modern, you really got to hire a new team, to do all that stuff. And like I say, preferably build it in the modern environment or upskill your existing technicians, engineers to the modern ways of working. Because many of them, and again, insurers are terrible for this, many of them will have been living, in the dark ages, and they would have built the systems many years ago and been maintaining them ever since. I worked when I was a consultant at a company I worked for before. I went and worked with this organisation. They were a healthcare insurance organisation, and they were leaking data and they didn't know from where. And the guy that helped me most with the investigation was the engineer that'd been there 30 years because he knew where everything was, where all the data sat, where all the logs lived. And they were just, these systems were monoliths. They were awful. But he was the only guy that knew all that. He was, close to retirement, and they were nowhere near replacing this platform. So, that skill set was going to leave the organisation at some point in the very near future, and they just hadn't considered what they're going to do beyond that. And this guy was great to work with, but yeah, I think that happens a lot. But if you haven't thought about succession planning for your core engineers, that's a big miss, that is. And you got to build the right balance and blend as you move from legacy to modern as well. And they just don't plan for that in the grand transformation program. Organizations tend not to plan for that.
Oh, it comes back to security first mindset and culture, right? When you're embarking on these, big programs and initiatives, having that right in at the beginning really helps make it a much easier process to follow and achieve.
I think it's part of the issue is that, and I think the other part is the resilience considerations. Because obviously, no security is perfect. So if you're going to get compromised or taken out, where's your resilience? If they're not thought about how they build that into a modern environment, and again, they've missed a massive trick. They're thinking old school, and they're not thinking about how a modern environment works.
So, in your experience today in that type of environment, was there a unique or unconventional approach that you've taken to solve a security problem?
I was thinking long and hard about this one, and I was trying to think of something windswept and interesting to say, to paraphrase Billy Connolly, but no. Basically, I've been I've been very focused on getting the basics right, or as right as they can be. Because, like I said before, everything's a compromise, everything's a negotiation, and getting those fundamental controls in place and tested regularly, and then reconfigured when they're not quite right, and then tested again. That's really what we've been focused on for the last few years. So I think and again, probably the only thing I could say around that is micro-segmentation. And I don't want to go into too much detail on this because I don't want to be indiscreet around our security model. But I started looking at micro-segmentation a few years ago. We had one of our partners came and spoke to us about Guardicore in particular, and then I saw a couple of other examples of micro-segmentation platforms, or workload segmentation, I think they're referred to as now. And I quite like the concept. I thought that solved a lot of our challenges, or at least act as an interim solution for a lot of our challenges around network segmentation in particular. So maybe that could be considered innovative. I don't know, but we've adopted that technology now. It's given us great visibility, great observability. It's helped with our asset management significantly, but it's quite time consuming to do. You need a person plus one to manage it in our size of environment. It's not something you can just set and forget. So I guess that's probably the closest thing I could say to answer that question.
Well, it's sometimes addressing the basics or the fundamentals is quite an unconventional or unique approach, because quite often you find organizations haven't even done that. So
yeah, I think we come on to this in a moment, but they look for those silver bullets all the time. Technical solutions that look great on paper, but the actual implementation of them is very difficult. It's very expensive. It never gets configured correctly, and then people give up and move on to something else because they just don't have the time to focus on it. And again, I've seen that in the past, fairly recently, where solutions that have been bought have just not been fit for purpose, and by the time you get to sorting it out, something new's come out that's surpassed it anyway. So it's very frustrating because the pace of change is so rapid. You've got to, as much as you can, get it right first time, and invest in getting it right first time, and bringing the maximum sort of juice out whatever that tool is to give you as much coverage as you can get from it. And if you don't do that, why bother in the first place?
Is there a myth or misconception in security that you wish people understood better?
There's a few actually. So, we touched on earlier that about security people turning up at meetings about it's not that welcome. To put it politely, it's people. We're the last people want in a meeting generally. Because they think we're the land of no. I'd love to change that perception. I think we're slowly changing it where I am at the moment. Generally speaking, we've got pretty good relationships across the organisation. When I ask to go to a team meeting and present, they're quite interested generally, and that's really rewarding. Like I say, I've got a few. I think the one for me is the frustration, and you'll have experienced this yourself, I'm sure, is where you've got an organisation and you say to them, look, we need a security engineer to do this, and they say, well, can't this person just do it? Well, no, because that person's a threat and vulnerability management specialist, but surely they're a security guy, aren't they? It's this assumption that because you're a security guy, a technical security guy, you can work across 800 different technologies. That's very frustrating. That is, because obviously if that was the case, it wouldn't be an issue talking about it. But you wouldn't put a Java coder. You wouldn't get a Java coder to go and work in AWS and configure AWS serverless systems. You just wouldn't do that. And they may well be able to do it, but it doesn't mean they're going to be configured well or in an appropriate way. So I think it's the conception that security people can solve every technology challenge on the planet is frustrating. And I guess the last one I'll mention is that when we touched on this earlier, when a company wants to invest in something that's going to make them more money, that the wallet's open and they'll chuck cash at it. But when it comes to securing that investment, they don't necessarily think that's an appropriate investment to make as well on top of it. So they're the key sort of misconceptions I think that we need to as a security community, we need to be better at that. And we don't debunk those myths at all, I don't think, very well.
Why do you think that is? Is it because it sometimes helps us get our work done, or is there something else?
There may be a bit of that. I'd rather it was the other way around, though. I'd rather people be welcome us with open hands for a conversation, open arms rather for a conversation. I'd like people to be interested in it because I think it's fascinating when you consider the level of activity that goes on to achieve a really good compromise. I worked at a company a few years ago. I did an investigation into a 44 million euro cryptocurrency theft, right? And the elements that were involved in that attack, because of the value of the attack, were absolutely fascinating. It's only the ones we detected. We detected 44 different compromised servers around the world that participated in the attack, and all they did was attack a guy's laptop. He had the wallet on the laptop that held the keys to the wallet where all the crypto was. So, but it was coordinated. It was organised crime. And that sort of stuff to me, maybe because of my background, I think it's fascinating. So I want people to come and ask about those sort of things. I'd happily talk about them all day.
So just to end this particular area, one of the biggest problems for organizations today, based on the way that everybody's ended up working, is supply chain. There's a lot of things being outsourced to suppliers, service providers, you name it. And so many of the recent breaches have happened within the supply chain and sometimes escalated to the primary organization. What do you guys do that really works in staying on top of those risks when it comes to those suppliers and partners that you work with?
We're not perfect, as I say. I'll caveat anything I say on this podcast with that. But we work very closely with our partners, and some are more engaged than others. I recently hired a supply chain security risk manager dedicated to the role. So she looks after my suppliers for me. She works very closely with procurement, works cross business in some of the technical areas. She's very good at Power BI and Power Apps as well, which is also very handy. But security, risk management, supply chain is not a side of the desk activity. When you think about the different aspects that you have to become involved in, like the legal contracts, we make sure we review every contract. We make sure that any additional clauses in the contract are considered by the buyer or the business owner, whatever it may be. And again, that wasn't the case a few years ago. That just didn't happen. Or if it did happen, that we weren't consulted. It's prior to my time here. So the scope for going wrong is quite big if you don't get it right in the early days. That contract negotiation, you can tie yourself into some sort of legal agreement that then when the wheel does come off 4 years down the line, you've got no recourse, and that's probably a bigger impact than if you suffer the cyber attack yourself. So especially in the modern supply chain. But also, building the relationships, having regular catch-up meetings with the team that's on the supplier side. Or the partner side. In our case, we have a lot of B2B contracts as well. Regular testing and monitoring, absolutely vital. And so you've got something, material to talk about, something with context to talk about. And that's they're the sort of key areas that we look at. We've been using a product that's been provided to us actually called Black Kite, which is a bit like security scorecard, and we use that for monitoring ourselves actually. But we also have security scorecard for a couple of our suppliers. And that gives a good indicator of where they're at in terms of their security journey, And it's not, again, that's not perfect. It's just showing the visible perimeter, and it doesn't show you anything beyond that. But it's a good starting point for the conversation, so you can build a relationship with that supplier or partner. We're just changing the way we do onboarding at the moment. So we have a 3-tier onboarding system, for example, and if data is being processed or exchanged, or there's an integration into one of our AA systems, then that immediately escalates it to a tier 3. But we're going to change it to a 2-tier system because we don't feel we need a 3-tier one. And obviously those 200-line questionnaires are most welcome when they land in your inbox. But again, we're building a model where we have a consistent set of answers to respond to those when they come into us, but also so we can make ours more efficient when we're pushing it out to suppliers. And we have some suppliers where, one man in his bank and his dog rather garages. And we have those, and then we have, Bosch, for example, and everybody in between. So we have to make it work for everybody, and there is a bit of risk management that goes on there as well. But we just have to be sensible in terms of what the actual risk is. We work very closely with data privacy team on this as well. We work hand in glove with those guys. We're getting more embedded with procurement. The procurement team's quite a decent size now. I think it used to be just a couple of people when I first joined, but that's grown into a much more appropriate organisation. So it's making sure relationships are in place more than anything, I think.
Yeah, just it was an important point in terms of the risk side of things. It's not always black and white from a questionnaire that you might send to a supplier. It's then evaluate what that means as a risk to you the organization. That's great. So we're just going to close out, Darren, and just ask just final questions and thoughts from you. What's been the proudest accomplishment of your career as a CISO so far? I mean, you mentioned quite a few achievements already. I'm just wondering if there's one that stood out for you.
Yeah, I didn't. I had to think about this one a little bit because I couldn't put my finger on one, to be honest. And then I thought about the team that I've built, and I thought, well, they are actually my proudest achievement, because what I've always aimed for is, if I'm not in the business, nobody notices. That's what I want to get to, So people know they can go to A, B, or C rather than go to DD, right? So that's what I'm aiming for. I'm not quite there yet, because I said earlier, people still come directly to me with stuff. I want them to have a single route in, but they get to the right people almost first time every time. And the team understand that, and they're working towards that. They're a really good bunch. And the security operations function, even though they're not my direct reports, they're a fantastic bunch as well. And we're all on the same page. And I think that's my most proud, the achievement I'm most proud of at the AA is building that team, without a doubt.
And if there was one thing you could change about how organizations approach cybersecurity today, what would that be?
And we've touched on it earlier. It's about the cost of securities. Considered incorrectly, in my view, for most organisations. They consider it a cost. They don't consider it an enabler. They don't consider it, value protection. They just consider it as a sunk cost or a necessary evil. And I think that needs changing drastically. I don't know how we do that, but I think we, as an industry, we're getting better at it. There are some things, some frameworks and mechanisms out there to help people articulate that to their C-suite. But value protection is really where I want to get to, because that's what we're doing at the end of the day. There's several different organisations within my organisation, or business units rather, within my organisation. They offer value protection to the organisation, and they're invested in to varying levels. So we probably need to, put our heads together a little bit and think about how we better articulate that. But when we talk about security in an organisation, it has to be across the organisation, not just in pockets. So again, typically, we're viewed as an IT security function. We're not. We're a security risk management function. But if you asked anybody in the organisation what we do, they'd say, they're IT security. And that perception needs to change, and again, we try and bang that drum, repeat that mantra every opportunity. But you have to be persistent. Going back to what I said earlier, you have to be persistent. You have to keep banging that drum, putting the message out there, putting articles out on your SharePoint every week, or your intranet, or whatever you've got, and making sure you're visible. And I think that's the only way to do it, really, and embed that security culture across the whole organisation.
I think that's really important, the value protection side of things. Maybe the bluntest way to do that, instead of calling ourselves information security teams, we should call ourselves value protection teams. It's in your face then, isn't it?
I have considered it. It doesn't sound as sexy though, does it? That's the trouble.
Yeah, true. Brilliant. So just one final one for you, Darren, is what advice would you give to someone aspiring to move into a CISO position?
So have a good think about why you want to do it, first and foremost. And, if you're going to move into a CISO position in a new business, then make sure you know the business. If you're moving up into one from an existing role in a business you're already in, make sure you know the business. And make sure you're able to connect with people in that organisation, because without those connections and personal relationships, it's going to be an uphill struggle. And you have to build those anyway when you first join an organisation. So practice that. If you're not a natural extrovert, if you're naturally introverted, you really are going to have to work at that, because it's fundamental to making progress. If you can't demonstrate some fizz, okay, we talked about that earlier. If you can't arrive at a meeting with a bit of fizz, it's going to be flat for everybody. like to take the soft drinks analogy a step too far, perhaps, but you really need to understand what the role entails. And I'm not saying that across, strategically across the globe. I mean, for that particular organisation, because it's different for every organisation, right? I'm a CISO in my organisation. My type of CISO role might not fit in another organisation, and it'll be the same for lots of different structures. So you just need to be really clear if you're coming into this industry at this level, why you want to come into it. I've started to see a lot more people come across into CISO roles now from other parts of the business. So they're very much business focused as opposed to security focused. I don't think that's a bad thing actually, but they just need to make sure they're striking a balance. But it's the same for security folk that move into a CISO role. They need to understand the business, need to make sure they're striking a balance. And it's not just all about putting up, walls and controls. It's about understanding the negotiation and where you're going to get to in the end.
Yeah, there is. There's quite a lot of transferable skills, I think, to move in and out of security, and it's something that the industry needs to tackle as well. Rather than just looking for academic qualifications or security related certifications, things like that. There needs to be a broader recognition of the skills that could be adopted and modified to help.
Well, one last thing I would say is that we talk about diversity a lot, right, in the modern workplace, and it's obviously it's important, but for me, it's diversity of thought that's most important. Because if I hired a load of ex-military people, we'd all think the same. It wouldn't be a very effective business-led security organisation, I would suggest. So, if you are looking to build a team or, run a team, you just make sure you've got that diversity of thought in there. So you've got a richness throughout the team and people are coming at problems from a different perspective. Because that's what I like to hire, problem solvers, people with different aspects and different views on particular problems. It's really important.
Makes a lot of sense. That's great. Darren, thank you very much for taking part in our podcast. There's a lot of insights that people will be able to take away from listening to it or watching it. So just final thanks and thanks for your time.
You're most welcome.